Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's start with what the new Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has been up to. Alicia, it seems like from news reports, there's some suggestion that he has an inclination to change the membership of a Centers for Disease Control committee called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. What's your read of the importance of this if RFK Jr. decides to do it?
So this panel, it includes about 19 outside independent, mostly doctors or medical professors, and they get together periodically and review vaccines and make recommendations for the vaccine schedule, who should get them, when, and these recommendations serve as the basis for the vaccine schedule that many schools and states use for their own mandates. But these recommendations also serve and help determine what vaccines go into the National Injury Compensation Program, and that is the no-fault system that lets people who have been injured or claim to be injured by vaccines to file claims in these special vaccine courts. Congress set up this system back in the 1980s in order to reduce the flood of litigation against vaccine makers. Now, the danger and the risk was always that RFK might try to remove a vaccine from this program and therefore invite a flood of litigation. And the risk here is, at least based on these news reports, is that, well, it might try to replace some of the members on this committee and stack them with people who are opposed to vaccines or have been, are friends of the trial lawyers, and they may decide to change their recommendations and giving the secretary grounds to remove a vaccine or other vaccines from the program. Simultaneously, he's also announced that he is going to create a separate commission to review the safety of vaccines. So there's a lot of things that he's already gearing up to do just in his first week.
Meantime, there's a growing outbreak of measles in West Texas. According to the Texas Health Department's update this morning, there are now 90 cases identified since late January. 16 of those patients have been hospitalized. About 90% of them are children, 18 and younger, most of them young children, and all but 5 as of now either have not been vaccinated for measles or their vaccination status is unknown. And Kim, part of why I think this is worth talking about is this doesn't have to happen. If you look at the data in Texas on MMR coverage, the measles, mumps, and rubella coverage for kindergarteners in public schools in this county in West Texas, Gaines County, where measles is now spreading, the center of this outbreak, the MMR coverage for kindergarteners is down to something like 82%. And Kim, it seems to me that RFK Jr. is in a position now as the nation's health secretary to either keep pushing those numbers down, spreading the kinds of things that he did as an activist when he was trying to be provocative and get attention, or he can take a look at the data as he promised the Senate he would do and get serious about trying to keep kids out of hospitals with measles.
I unfortunately have very little hope that he's going to get on the right page on vaccines. He has spent his life essentially spewing out a lot of propaganda on this, incorrect facts, sowing a lot of fear. And he's so tight, too, with these trial lawyers who exist. They love that environment because their only goal is to file cash out lawsuits where they bank millions. And so what I'm extremely concerned about is what Alicia was just mentioning, just simply his ability to use any government office to cast a little bit of doubt on vaccines and their efficacy is not only about going to push down vaccination rates, but the trial lawyers are looking for that too, right? They're going to look and say, well, it used to be that the FDA said this was 100% 100% safe. They won't say that now, and they'll introduce that into court. This is the kind of stuff where he can be extremely helpful to his billionaire buddies that live in courtrooms. So, and it's tragic, by the way. You're right. Vaccination rates have been falling. In particular, they've fallen a bit again for routine childhood vaccinations during the COVID period. By the way, the public health system and officials have a lot to answer for there because it was their own terrible handling of the COVID vaccination that has fed into that. But this is no joke. Measles is not something that you can just have this sort of, it's really not that big of a deal, just because we have not really coped with it. Measles is a disease, and we have all the tools we need. And unfortunately, we've got a guy in the top office who currently doesn't care about that as much as he does the tort bar.
I agree entirely that it seems like too many people who grew up in an era where measles was essentially eradicated from the United States have forgotten or never learned how terrible it actually can be. And by the way, that goes for some of these other things that are routine childhood immunizations, mumps, diphtheria, tetanus. I think we should not go back to the days where those were scourges on American life and try to remember, go ask some old timers what their experience was of some of these illnesses when they were spreading rapidly in the United States. Alicia, we'll give you the last word, but on the point about this vaccine board in the CDC, one thing that's important to keep in mind, speaking of this conflict of interest, we might put it that way, is Kennedy has this stake in a lawsuit, litigation against a maker of the HPV vaccine. This was a point of contention in his Senate confirmation hearings, and he did not agree to give up that stake. He agreed to hand it off to his son, who works at the law firm who is suing the company, and that's a little bit of food for thought.
That's a clear conflict in itself, right? His son probably would have inherited it if his trial lawyer friends at this law firm win their case. His son probably would have inherited that anyways. I mean, there are two separate cases going on. There's one in LA state court, and then there's separate federal multi-district litigation. And the only reason, by the way, that these legal cases or lawsuits aren't bigger is because of the National Injury Compensation Program, which requires people who have been supposedly injured to file within 3 years of their injury and seek compensation there. And the problem was when RFK and his trial buddy friends tried to recruit people for this lawsuit is that a lot of them weren't eligible because they never filed claims, and they're only coming forward some decades or more than a decade later saying, oh, well, I did experience this. It's called POTS syndrome. And all of a sudden they're tying it to the vaccines, and which is a case in point why this National Injury Compensation Program exists. And the concern here is that RFK, back to Kim's point, could take a number of actions, both with removing people from this vaccine committee or just releasing certain data or juking studies that could help his trial lawyer friends in this case and others.
Thank you, Alicia and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.